Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Paragon. In this video I'd like to go over my DPS build for my Paladin for the new zone Avernus. This build should get you through all solo content fairly comfortably. You should at least be able to one or two shot all the mobs, that being the less tanky ones. So let's jump straight into it. First up we just go to the power selection. Now these can vary between whether you're in an AoE fight or a single target fight. AoE being against a whole bunch of mobs, and single target being up against a boss or some such big tanky mob. Now currently for my AoE build I use this setup as you see right here, using this selection of feats. However, only actually a few feats here matter, such as our Baneful Strikes here, giving us that free cast on our Bane, our Divine Pursuit, enabling us to regain more divinity while we attack, and that's pretty much it. However, you could take the Sacred Shield feat just to enhance your Sacred Weapon to give it that more threat if you're running with a party and you just also want to do DPS. So for my at-wills, you can see here I'm using Oath Strike. I always generally have Radiant Slam slotted. If I don't, I just feel really uncomfortable and I don't know what's going on. It's just how I play, and I'm always used to having the rush skill in that right click. For encounters then, generally your bread and butter is your Bane. Use your Bane just to kill off those big areas of mobs, and generally you could one or two shot them with this as long as you have enough stats and bonuses to damage. As a secondary, I always generally like to use Relentless Avenger, just giving you that ability to close the gap between you and your enemy nice and quickly, or to finish off one mob who has a little bit more HP than the others. For my third one, I'm generally running Burning Light, just to give them that stun effect so they can stop hitting me, and also it gives a little bit more damage. However, alternatively you could switch to Sacred Weapon instead of Burning Light if you're against a whole bunch of mobs, like elite mobs with tons of HP, and you know the fight's going to take a little bit longer. For my dailies, I generally save it for Divine Judgment or for Radiant Charge. Divine Judgment against those pesky mobs with a ton more HP, and Radiant Charge if you just want to knock down and rail over a whole bunch of mobs. As for our mechanics, I don't generally tend to use my tab whatsoever, my Divine Champion. However, I do generally use my block if I'm against enemies which tend to knock or immobilize or stun. Generally you can immunity frame most of those effects. As you can see there, the effect making you immune to most of the control effects. Class features, you obviously want to go with Blessed Wanderer if you're by yourself, just for that extra damage bonus, and also Composure, also just for that extra divinity regen nice and quickly. However, if you are again in a tougher fight, you may want to use Divine Retribution just to gain that extra damage, as essentially the monsters drain your shield or your guard. And now for the build I would use against bosses and solo mobs and such. Generally, you're just switching out purely their Smite instead of that third encounter power, which normally would be, let's say, Burning Light or Sacred Weapon. Then of course I'm still using that Relentless Avenger, it's a good single target damage power, and then either you use Bane or you use Sacred Weapon. I generally prefer to just go with Bane because of the Baneful Strikes feat. You can generally get that procced at least once in 10 seconds, whereas Sacred Weapon, the cooldown being there 28 seconds and it only lasting for 10 seconds. It's decent when you consider the extra magnitude buffed to, let's say, your Shielding Strike. You're hitting that every 0.3 seconds, and if you add their 40 magnitude to that, you're getting 85 magnitude, so that's pretty decent. There is one thing you need to consider, which I haven't mentioned in all of my other builds, is Smite here. It deals radiant damage to target enemy, however its magnitude decreases as your remaining divinity decreases. So as this bar here on the right decreases, the magnitude of your smite will decrease. So ideally you only want to smite when your divinity is nearly full. So contrary to what I've previously said in my other builds, you don't actually want to spam your smite. You want to save it for when you have nearly full divinity, then you use it, get that divinity back, and then use it. Of course, if you know the boss or mob and some such is going to die within 2 or 3 hits of smite, then of course you may as well just spam it. But if it's going to be a much longer fight, like say you're in a boss fight and such, and they have a lot more HP and you know it's going to take you like more than a minute, then you're better off just dragging it out a little bit just to make the most of your smite. So that's pretty much it for your AoE and single target builds. Now let's move on to generally the gear you want to be running with, and especially the stats, the ratings. So currently in Avernus is this zone right here with the Redeemed Citadel down there at the bottom left. All of these mobs currently have an enemy rating. If you look in the epic trial there, you can see Zariel's challenge, an enemy rating of 40,000. So that's exactly the same for this zone, Avernus here. That means you want to have most of your stats at 90,000, because that being enemy rating plus 50,000 is 90,000. You need that 50,000 to get that 50%, whether it's to reduce your enemy's damage resistance by 50% through armor penetration, or to increase your own damage resistance by increasing your defense by 50,000 above the enemy rating. Because that's how counter stats work. If you need more information on how they work, I have a video you should be able to see in the top right there, the little card popping up. Now, ideally, as I mentioned, you want to have 90,000 in most of your ratings. And especially in armor penetration, you want to have that 90,000. You can see I'm a little bit over. In defense, you want to have that 90,000 so you don't get absolutely smashed and steamrolled by the mobs, so that you can at least have a little bit of survivability. Critical strike. Since our goal here is to do damage, yes, you also want that capped at 90,000. On top of this, you want accuracy at 90,000 to make sure the enemies never deflect when you hit them. And then combat advantage. It's not too important when you're solo, since there is no guarantee you'll always have combat advantage. However, what I do like to run with is an active companion. With an active companion, she can just help you finish off mobs and such by dealing her own bit of damage, and also she can grant you combat advantage by standing on the other side of the mobs. Combat advantage thus granting you extra damage bonus. With my current stat here in combat advantage, I'm only at 37,000 above the enemy rating, thus I'm only gaining 37% extra damage through my combat advantage. Of course, the cap for this is 140,000, that being 100% plus 40,000 the enemy rating. So those are the ratings you want to get. Now how do I actually achieve these ratings? Let's first jump to companion gear. Companion gear is vital for capping your stats. Currently what I'm using here in tandem with a summoned companion helps me get these stat caps. I am using the ivy grown icon of the companion, giving that crit and combat advantage. I'm using the torched belt of the companion, giving that defense and that accuracy. And as well as this, I'm using the roped talisman of the companion, giving that armor pen and that extra accuracy. I do not currently have the epic variant of this. I damn wish I could, but I'm gonna wait for the easy mode of Zariel so I can farm that to try and obtain the epic version of this. On top of companion gear, of course, it's vital to have these bonding stones at higher rank as possible. Rank 13s are generally okay, but try and eventually get them up to 15. These bonding runestones will essentially double the amount of stats that you gain from the companion. These stats here, which I have from Xuna. Now for the actual summoned companion you want to have, Xuna. She's one of the best, especially in AoE fights. A top second is the Abyssal Chicken. I have a video on potentially comparing both of them. That will also be linked in the cards at the top right there, and you can see kind of the difference between them. They kind of vary between which is best in single target and which is best in AoE, and also what types of mobs you're fighting. Other than that, there are actually a few other companions that do come close to the amount of DPS that these two companions can do, Xuna and their Abyssal Chicken. However, they're not nearly as good. If you are struggling to meet these caps, as I have right here, which you probably will be unless you have an endgame build with lots of different enchantments to spare, then I highly recommend using an augment companion like the owlbear here, giving you extra bonuses, and essentially it gives you your stats, and then you'll gain even more stats by running the bonding runestones. If I just summon this augment companion here, you can see it's an augment companion because of its power augmentation. You can see, if you look at my character, my stats now. I am well over the cap on a lot of my stats here, being at armor pen, defense, crit, and even accuracy. Because Augment Companions give you there a total of 310% of your stats, instead of what a active companion would give you is 210% of their stats. So now on to our passive bonuses from companions. I highly recommend using the Baby Deep Crow in our offense stat, giving you that extra power. In defense stats, there isn't actually a whole lot to go around that would be great for DPS. There is like the Minstrel here giving 4k power, there is the Splinters companion giving you crit severity, and other than that there's not much more. I'm using the Slime here for the 8k defense, and I'm just using the Ion Stone of Might there just for 2k power. Yeah, not much at all. In utility, you could ideally have a Alpha Compy here, however I have no intention to spend that much Astral Diamonds just for a DPS build, so I just have the Githyanki here from the pack. You could alternatively, of course, use the Baby Owlbear presence, giving you that extra damage when you fail to critically hit at a 10% chance. Alternatively, you could use the Energon here just for the extra HP. It gives a nice chunky amount. As for the companion enhancement, I'm currently just using Redemption here for a bit of survivability. However, you could justifiably use your Potency or your Potent Precision. Generally, these are up nearly 100% of the time, as long as you are attacking. So, now let's jump over to the actual gear to be using, which shall also contribute to giving you all these nice juicy stats. So what I'm running here is, you can see, 2 sets of the Lion Guard from the Infernal Citadel. Along with this, I'm using the Infernal Forge Breastplate, however I have it upgraded to be the Fiend Forge Breastplate. You can do so by restoring it with reagents found within the zone Avernus, essentially giving you that 1% against demons, devils and fiends, which is convenient for the zone Avernus, because that's pretty much all the mobs that are here. And for my boots, I'm using the Rusted Iron Leggings, the Cursed Rusted Iron Leggings. Yeah, if you're solo, generally, you should be able to kill the mobs faster than they kill you, so you should be decent. And then as soon as you're out of combat, you can pretty much quickly heal yourself with like potions of healing. So healing is generally not an issue. If it is, I highly recommend partying up. And then not to use these boots, of course. Now, of course, for our weapons, you ideally want the ones which have the highest weapon-based damage, like I am fortunate enough to have the Celestial set. However, you could definitely use the Lionheart set, it's pretty decent. However, again, you must be able to complete Tower of the Mad Mage, and it can be, for sure, hard to find a group to do so. However, if you are not fortunate enough to get the Celestial set or the Lionheart set, just use the Legion Guard set. This has the next highest weapon-based damage of all the other sets. This set is very easily obtained through the treasure maps, which you will get a whole abundance of them, but just by killing mobs. And the drop chance is actually pretty frequent. You can see I currently have them as my appearance. Now over on the right side, the rings I'm using currently here are ones to essentially benefit my instant damage, like the gold-plated ring, giving me that extra 3% damage to our encounter powers, such as Bane, to make sure I can one-shot those mobs, one or at least two-shot them, nice and quickly. I'm also using the Ring of the Brutal Fiend, this found from killing either Gary or Mog, essentially buffing your power for that 10 seconds when you enter combat. It's fairly useful for when you're killing mobs, because that would generally set pretty frequently. You go into a fight, you kill them, you move on to the next set of mobs, you'll proc again, and you'll gain that buff. Then for our shirt and pants, I'm using the Ebony Stained Raid shirt found within Undermountain and all the other content corresponding to that, essentially giving you 3% damage whenever your guard is full, your stamina. And then for the trousers, I'm just using the highest item level one there, giving you the most power, the Infernal Forge Raid trousers just from Seals of the Fallen. For my actual neck, waist and artifact set, I'm using the Demon Lord set, giving you a total of 10% additional damage, but this depends on the variation of your HP compared to your enemy's HP. So if you have around the same amount of HP, then this percentage will be actually pretty low. Alternatively, you can use the Book of Vile Darkness set there, the Call of Evil set. Essentially, it will give you a total of 5% extra damage, 2.5% plus the extra 2.5% against demons, devils, and fiends, which again are all the mobs within Avernus. Now onto our actual artifacts. I highly recommend the Storyteller Journals. Due to the fact of the 3 of set there, do additional hit for weapon damage on a critical hit. This is pretty decent, and it adds up fairly quickly, especially also for when you just want to one-shot mobs, because it will deal this damage instantly, well, as long as you crit, which, if you're capped, is at a 50% chance. So I highly recommend just running with 3 of those books, and having the Envenomed Storyteller Journal as your primary, just to gain that action points nice and quickly. Alternatively, if you don't have these, there are definitely multiple others. The Staff of Flowers here being a very good one against mobs. So now let's move on to the actual enchantments you want to be running. In our utility slots, dark enchantments. Tacticals, not much point when you're in solo, because you're not going to receive much healing anyway. And darks will just help buff those stats up nicely. Now for offense stats, of course you just want Radiance. That being if you already have the stats for the current zone you're in, like I currently do here. So you may as well just stack up all that power you can, and essentially it will be more damage. In defense slots, I highly recommend Radiance, just to give you that more HP and survivability. However, if you don't have your defense capped, Azures might be a good idea, or even brutal enchantments. As for the weapon enchantment, a Vorpal enchantment is all around a very good enchantment for a Paladin, due to the fact it will buff your damage as a tank and thus aggro, and also buff your outgoing healing due to crit severity on your critical heals. And of course, in our build here, just for doing damage, it will help deal a lot more damage on those critical hits. As for what is best, well, arguably the Lightning enchantment is actually best for AoE environments, and arguably the Balethorn is the best for long drawn out boss fights. So you pick and choose. I highly recommend, if you don't have a weapon enchantment at all, definitely pick up a Vorpal when you can. As for armor enchantment, well, it doesn't particularly matter. Generally, you're going to kill them faster than they're going to kill you. However, a Shadowclad is a very good enchantment when you're against a whole pile of mobs that hit you fairly frequently. Alternative to this, a Bark Shield is a very good idea when you're against a boss or some big elite mob. Overall, however, I just prefer the Elven Battle enchantment for a tank, just reducing those stun durations and immobilizes and such. Elven Battle helping out great there, and as well as this, giving you the ability to regain that stamina nice and quickly again. I guess last thing to mention would be our weapon modifications here. I highly recommend on the main hand just take Oath Strike, buffing that AoE damage, and on the off hand, you can see there I don't have the correct ones, but I have it for the doing Zariel. Ideally you would have their power and then crit severity. You would get that power up to 2,500 and you'd get the crit severity up to 10%. Now let's move on to mounts. Mounts are not so important, however the insignias is what you want to be going for. If you have a active companion like I do, Xuna, then you want to be picking up the Warlord insignias, Warlord's Inspiration and Warlord's Encouragement, giving a total of 25% extra damage to your companion. As for the other 3, you can see I'm just going with Gladiator's Guile, essentially buffing my movement speed. As for the insignias themselves, highly recommend using either Dominance or Brutality ones, just benefiting you with that extra power and thus damage, as long as you don't need any other stats. Over here in the current section, generally you want to be running with Dominant Force for extra power. However, you could justifiably use Fast Striding if you wanted to get places much quicker. I generally like to use it, especially when you're in dungeons and such, and you just want to keep moving. Now, if you need a bit more survivability, I generally switch over to my Stalwart if I'm against a boss that's going to do a significant amount of damage to me. As for the mount combat power, I currently only have 2 here to choose from, and both of them are pretty meh. However, the Griffin, the Piercing Screech, is pretty good to stun the mobs and make them deal less damage to you. I also like it because it's a good buff to everybody when you're running really tough content, like Zariel. That's the only reason why I actually got this. Now let's finally move on to Boons. Boons here, of course, you ideally want to join a guild ASAP. A rank 20 guild. Rank 20 guild there will most likely give you a power bonus, or at least the crit severity bonus. Power should be up there at 8,000 extra power. Crit severity should be up there at 15%. For defense then, you choose what you need. I'm currently using defense to cap, yes, my defense. Utility, ideally movement speed. You can get around those zones much quicker and just kill those mobs. Now for campaign boons, I did make a video, should be linked in the cards there just now, that shows you how ineffective boons actually can be. You gain actually only a total of 5,000 power via all the boon slots. If you have the boon points, then put them, all in power. As you go, make sure to put them in Marathon Runner to gain that 12.5 extra movement speed. This is like one of the best boon thingies. Also, take Simple Support for Companion Influence. Not sure why, but I haven't put any in there. And also, I have pretty much my boon points scrambled, giving me bonuses to heal pots and also bonuses to all the other different mob types. This one here, Demonic Mastery, being particularly good for in Avernus currently. For tier 5, Severe Criticism for crit severity is decent, and then it's up to you what you choose between like action points or recharge speed. As for master boons, none of them are really going to benefit you much. So that's pretty much everything for my build. However, the last thing I would like to mention is, yes, the consumables. If you're a hardcore solo player, then you may want to pick up some consumables to help you along your way. Currently, what I am using to cap out my accuracy is Watermelon Sorbet, an event food that will buff your power by 10% and your accuracy, thus giving you a larger amount of offense stats and as a result damage. Now for the actual pots, I highly recommend the ones that grant crit severity. These two here, Wildstorm Elixir and Superior Flask of Potency, giving you there a total of 17.5% extra crit severity, buffing those critical strikes. So, I know this has been quite a long video. Hopefully this was fairly informative and helpful. I do generally like to talk a lot about my build and be very clear on why and what I'm using. So hopefully I presented this well. If I did, consider leaving a like. If you're new around here, consider subscribing. And we'll see you lads and ladies next time. Goodbye for now.